Hi everyone and welcome to today's class. We're going to be working with the mini placement tool today. My name is Birgit Koopsen. I'm a brand ambassador for Gelli Arts and we're going to do some gel printing using the mini placement tool. So we have two different tools that we are going to work with today. The one is a ½ inch wide and the other one is an inch wide. And I am going to show you why and how this tool can help you creating beautiful prints. There are basically two reasons to use the mini placement tool. One is if you want to have your print in the middle of your paper with a nice white border all around, or if you are doing multiple layers of printing on top of each other and you want to make sure that all of the layers are in the exact same position. So let's just turn the camera and let me show you how this works. So here I do have the two tools. This is the 1 inch wide tool and this is the ½ inch wide tool. So it depends on what you are going to use your papers for, how wide you would like to have a border around your prints, or if you're not really interested in having the borders, but you just want to make sure that you have all of the layers in the same position, then it might be less important which one of the two you're going to use. Now, this tool, both of them can be used with any size of plate. So it doesn't matter if I use, for instance, I have here, let me see, I have here, for instance, the 5x7 plate. I have a small plate, the 3x5 inch plate. I also have a round plate, the 4 inch round plate, but you could also use this with the 8x10 plate. Any plate will work. The only thing you have to keep in mind is if you want to have your print exactly in the middle of your paper, you have to cut your paper to size. And how do you do that? Well, I'm going to show you. For instance, if you have the 5x7 plate and you're going to use the 1 inch border, sorry, then that means that your paper has to be 1 inch wider all around. So it needs to be 1 inch more here, but also down here to this side and to this side, which means that if you have a 5x7 plate, your paper needs to be 7x9 inches big to get the plate exactly in the middle. If you would use the ½ inch placement tool, then you have to add a ½ inch on each side, which means 1 inch to the size of your plate. So a 5x7 plate would be a 6x8 paper. The same if you use any other size of plate, just add 1 inch or 2 inch to the paper size. And if you use a circle, and the circle is a 4 inch round plate, then also you add the size of twice of your placement tool, which means that if you want to do a round print in the middle of a square sheet of paper and your plate is 4 inches, then your paper needs to be 6x6 inches. And if you use the ½ inch placement tool, then it needs to be 5x5 inches. I hope that makes sense. So depending on the type of prints you want to make, you can cut your paper to size. But if you're, for instance, making prints that you want to cut out or use as collage material, and your only reason to use the tool is to get all the layers in the same place, then it really doesn't matter if your paper is cut to size, because even if you would use like a larger sheet of paper, let me see if I have one here to show you. If you have a larger sheet of paper and you put it here, then of course your print would be here on your paper and you would have a lot of white space here. But it doesn't really matter if the only purpose is to get the layers in the same direction and then same not direction, the same area, exact same area. And then you can just cut away the white borders later. So let me start by doing a print where I want to have the print exactly in the middle of the paper. And then, of course, it isn't, it can be a single print where I do no layering at all, but I still want to use the tool because I want to have it in the middle of my paper. So I'm going to use this 5x7 plate. And the paper I have here is 7 by 9 inches. And also the paper that I have underneath my plate is the same size. So I already have kind of an idea what the middle of my paper is. But even if I would put my plate like this and put my paper in the tool, then I still would have my print in the middle of the paper because the tool is going to determine where my print is going to be. So it is really not important what size of paper you have underneath your plate. So if you have not done any classes with me before, let me tell you why I use a white sheet of paper underneath my plate. That's because I like to see my the colors of my paint as accurate as possible. And if I put my plate on a darker background, like for instance my surface, then the colors might appear differently, especially if you have thin and translucent layers of paint. So that's why I like to place my plate on a white sheet of paper, so I have a better idea of how my colors actually look. As you can see, I have not cleaned my plate before this class, and I can tell you why. Sometimes I do it on purpose. I leave my plate uncleaned because I like those little bits of leftovers from a previous print to show up in my next print, because it gives a little bit more of a distressed look. It might add a color that I'm not actually using, which is fun. Today, the reason was that I was actually too late because you in the US have already are already on daylight saving time, and we here in the Netherlands are not. So I got a call that they were waiting for me. You were waiting for me. So that's why my plate is not clean today. So let's do a print. It can be anything. It can be a single print. How about we do a flower print? Let's do some printing with flowers. I always enjoy printing with flowers. And as I said, I'm going to leave these little bits of leftovers on the plate, and they will pull up in the final print. But that might actually add something nice to the final print. Of course, if you, for whatever reason, want to print on a clean plate and not all of the paint came off with your last print, then you can clean your plate. For instance, with a baby wipe, especially when the paint is still a little bit wet, it's very easy to clean it off with a baby wipe. And if the paint is already dry, then you can use something like packaging tape, or for instance, masking tape to pull up the dried paint from the plate. And then sometimes you end up with some really nice tape as a bonus that you can use in, for instance, mixed media projects. So that's a fun way to do it. And if your plate is really dirty and you the baby wipe is not working and you don't want to use tape, then you can use a little bit of a few drops of oil, for instance, baby oil, but also any vegetable oil, mineral oil will work, and remove all of the dirt and all of the leftover pigments and bits of paint from your plate. So I usually just add a few drops of the oil on top, and then use a baby wipe or a paper towel to clean off my plate. And if you use a paper towel and your plate is kind of dry after removing the baby oil, you can just go ahead and print straight on top. If you have the idea that your plate is still a little bit greasy, that it has a layer of oil still on top of it, then you could use a baby wipe, or you can wash it. Just rinse it with lukewarm water and a little bit of soft soap, and then your plate will be perfect to go. Now I want to dry this a little bit quicker, so this is quite this paint is drying very quite slowly, and I don't want to sit around and wait. But as you know, you cannot use any heat on the plate, so no heat tool. And the hair dryer is making quite a lot of noise for an online class. So I have my special new favorite tool, which is a balloon pump, and I am just going to use it to speed up the drying time of my print. And I hope it doesn't take too long. It's quite a thick layer of paint here, and it takes a little bit to dry. So it is always really important, not only because you get nicer prints when you do so, but also for the drying time, that you use very thin layers of paint. The thinner your layers are, but of course they still need to be workable. They should not like dry instantly, but the thinner they are, the nicer most of the time your prints will be, because the tools you use to remove paint from the plate can only pick up a certain amount of paint. And the more paint is on the plate, the less crisp and your patterns will be, the less paint, the more paint will stay behind. That's basically it. And you're getting less of the really like open spaces where all of the paint has been taken away by your printing tool. So you get nicer patterns and nicer textures if you work with thinner layers. And also, of course, the paint dries a little bit faster. And here you can see that I used a little bit too much paint. You can see it because I kind of, it was a little bit, how do I say that? My flower kind of, I don't know how to say it. It's like it moved. So it was a little bit slippery. Is that I think that's the right word, right? When I put it down and there's too much paint, I'm more likely to move it, that it's impossible to keep it in the same position. And you will see it later when I pull the print. You will see that I have a really nice flower here, and that here the paint moved a little bit. So actually this is yes?
Just know, because we're on Zoom, Zoom has a noise cancellation. So if for any reason you need to use a blow dryer, you're more than welcome.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, but that might be handy, but I don't have it on hand now, so I will just use my, but good to know for the next time. Thank you.
Birgit, we also had a question about the artificial flowers. Is there a certain amount of times that you can use them before they're no good for the printing?
Oh, well, you can use them many, many, many times. I don't really know how many times I used this flower already. I made a lot of prints with them, but of course, at some point, so much paint will have built up on the flower that you lose details, and you might think that doesn't look so nice anymore, and then it's maybe time for a new flower. But I don't think I have thrown away a flower yet, and I've been making flower prints for quite a while. So yeah, and that's also, again, if you use thin layers of paint, then of course it takes longer for the paint to build up on your tools too, so you can use them longer. Another reason to use thinner layers. So this should be dry. And I'm just going to make it a simple print because it's about the tool today and not about flower prints. So I'm just going to use 2 colors and just pick it up. I'm not going to color in the separate flowers, which you could actually do. But now I'm just going to, and here I'm using a little bit too little paint. That can also happen, that you don't have enough paint to roll out on the entire plate. This should work. So now I'm going to place the tool in the corner. And if you are left-handed, then you can also put it in the other corner. The only difference is then that you have the longer part here, so you can put it here. But you could also put it down here if you prefer working that way. It doesn't really matter. You can use it in any corner you like. So now, normally I would just leave this on for a couple of minutes, maybe like 5 minutes or so, for all of the paint to dry, because then I will be absolutely sure that I will pull up all of the paint. If the paint dries, I should say when the paint dries, no matter how many layers there are, the layers of paint will always stick together and the paint will always stick to the paper. And the plate is made to release the paint, which means that if you leave everything on the plate to dry completely, even if you come back after days, you will always be able to pull up the paper from the plate. It will not stick to the plate, and with having all the layers dried, you can be absolutely sure that everything comes off the plate, because everything will just stick to the paper. And if your paint is still a bit wet, there is a chance that some paint stays behind on the plate. And then it's really important that you use those thin layers, because thinner layers are easier to pull. One thing you should not do is wait too long to pull straight away and not long enough for everything to dry. Because if part of the paint is dry and part of the paper is still a bit moist, then your paper will tear when you pull it off the plate. So it either needs to be still wet and pull straight away, or it needs to be completely dry and then everything will come off. And unfortunately, I just saw I'm in between. So there's no other option for me than to wait for this to dry completely. So I will just put it aside and just move on to the next print and wait for the other one to dry completely. Okay, that's the 1 inch. Let's do the 1/2 inch plate with the tiny little plate. The 1/2 inch tool with the little 3x5 plate. And on this print, I am going to do more than 1 layer. So you can see, let me see where my printing paper is, that should be this paper. So I'm going to put my plate on that paper too. I always like it when my paper is a little bit bigger than my plate, so that I can also use masking tape to apply it to my surface, and because I don't want my plate to move while I'm working on it. Like when I roll out my paint, I don't want my plate to go everywhere. So that's why I do this. So yeah, you can build up layers on the plate and then just pull them in one go, or you can build up layers on paper, which can be a good idea if you want to do masking, for instance. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do at least 3 layers to show you how the tool helps with getting the paper in the same position every time. So I'm going to start with a lighter color for my background. And by the way, I'm using the paints that I'm using today are these 3, and they are all available at Michael's. So I have Winsor and Newton, I have Amsterdam, and I have Liquitex. And I like all 3 of these paints because they have a really nice consistency. They roll out nicely in thin layers on the plate, and they are have quite a lot of pigment. So the colors stay nice and bright, even though you work with thin layers. So these paints are perfect for gel printing. And maybe interesting for you to know is that you can also see, and that is especially handy to know when you do several layers and you do masking, that you know if your paints are translucent or opaque. So if you have paints like these, like the more professional paints or student grade professional paints, then on the tube you can see what if your paints are translucent or semi-translucent or opaque, and you can see it. There is a little square on the tube, and if you have paint in bottles, then it will be on the bottle. So there's a little square here. And as you can see on this specific paint, that square is open. It's an open square. Here you have a little black square, and on this one you have a square that is half filled, which means that this paint is opaque, this paint is translucent, and this paint is semi-translucent. Now, I usually, when I do just general gel printing, I don't look at opacity. I just look at colors and go with the flow. But if you do masking and you want your final layer to cover up the previous layers, then of course it is important to know if your paints are opaque or translucent. So I'm going to add a little bit of orange here, and then I'm going to create my background. And what I am going to do is I'm going to mark my paper at the bottom. So put a little cross there, so I know for sure that I put the paper back on my plate every time with the same side down. First of all, that's handy because otherwise my print might be upside down, if that is relevant, but also because your plate is not always completely the edges are not always completely straight, which means that if you create a print and then the next time you put your paper on the other way around, it might not completely line up because of the plate not being very, having the very straight edges. I hope that makes sense. Okay, just going to roll out these colors.
Birgit, Heather is asking,
Yes.
should you use translucent paint first for the top layer?
For the first layer, you can, because especially when you print on white paper, it doesn't really matter. The first layer basically is white, because that's the color of your paper. So if you use translucent colors on your first layer, they will have their actual color because the background is white. But if you would print, for instance, on pattern paper or on black paper or on craft paper, for instance, and you want to make sure that the colors in your first layer appear on the paper as they really are, then it is important to use opaque colors, because otherwise, if you use a translucent color on a black background, if you use a translucent yellow on a black background, then your yellow will not show. You will not, maybe not even recognize that it's yellow. So it needs to be an opaque color to actually stand out on the black background. So here I have my first layer. And then I want to add a second layer, and in the second layer I want to create open areas so the colors of my first print will show. That means that I am going to use colors that are have a certain contrast with the colors in my first print, so that I will actually see the pattern. If I would use the same colors, then it would hardly show. So I am going to use, for instance, a permanent rose. And although this is a translucent color, it will show up on this background because of the specific colors I used here. This will show up on a yellow and on orange. If my first layer would have been dark blue, for instance, then it would show way less than it will on this color. So yeah, if that is not something that you already have in your system, kind to say, then you just should experiment with the variety of opacity your paints have, and just see what happens. What happens if I start my print with a darker color? Because if you start with the lighter colors, as I did here, it's a lot easier to build up layers with darker colors than it is the other way around. Because if you start with the really dark colors, then all of the colors you put on top need to be opaque. And if you start with the lighter colors, that's less important. So I'm going to add some texture to this second layer. And what am I going to use to create the texture? How about I use just some Lego? And also I am not going to use my entire plate. I'm going to use only part of my plate, which is also makes it also easier with the tool to eventually get the entire image covered. So I was going to use this color, and I'm only going to roll out a little bit at the top. Yeah. Oops. That fell down. A little bit more. That's the downside of the really translucent colors, is that you need a little bit more paint because the layers get too thin easily. So I'm just going to push down my Lego in there to create dots like this. Now I'm going to put my tool here and make sure I have the paper with the cross down, and I place it exactly in that corner again. And now I should have this layer in the exact same position as my previous layer. And that worked. So now I'm going to do a different pattern in a different color down here. So let's do turquoise green. If I can get some out. It's a little bit dry. And it's right at the beginning. So I think there's a little bit of dried paint in there. And again, I'm going to roll out. There's still some of that dried paint. Okay, this should work. And I'm going to use a different texture. How about I have some. I have like hot glue texture plate that I created with some hot glue. You can create really nice organic texture tools with hot glue. If you're interested, there is a Michael's class on hot glue texture tools available on the YouTube playlist. Okay. That's the next layer. I might have used a little bit too much paint, so some might stay behind. There's my texture, and as you can see, perfectly in the same place as my previous layer. There's a little bit left on the plate, but that's fine. I'm just going to leave it there. Now, if, for instance, I want to use a mask on top of this background, so I want to cover up the background and just leave certain areas open, then I can use masks. And of course, you can buy masks, but you can also very easily create your own mask by hand cutting or die cutting. What I like to do, for instance, is take an acetate sheet and place it on top of an image, for instance, in a magazine image, and then trace the image on the acetate sheet, cut it out, and then this way I create my own masks, or I just hand cut shapes like this, for instance, to use as a mask. But you can also use a die cutting machine to create masks in all kinds and sizes. So yeah, there are a lot of possibilities. But if I would, for instance, want to let me see, what am I going to use? Well, I'm just going to use the circles because I didn't, or maybe the stars. Maybe it's fun to use stars today. I use circles all the time. So let's do stars. So I didn't really think about the final project here. So I also didn't think about the patterns and the colors that I used for my first two layers. So for instance, if I would have thought about using people, a mask from a person, then I would probably have used different patterns or different colors for my background, but who cares? Let's just do people because I like to print these. I'm just going to print these. So to make sure that my masks stay exactly where I want them, I am using, and I hope I have it here. I do. This is a repositionable adhesive. It's from Scrapbook Adhesives, also available at Michael's, and I hope Dominic can find the link because I didn't have time before we started to say that I was going to use this. But Scrapbook Adhesives, Easy Dots, available on the Michael's website. And what I am going to do is I'm going to add this to my mask. And then I'm going to place my mask on top of my print, and it will stay in that position when I turn my paper over. Okay. So what I need now is an opaque color because I want to cover up all of the open areas, and only the paint that's underneath the mask is going to show. So let me see if I have a contrasting opaque color here. And of course I don't. Not one that is like really contrasting. So what I can do is I can print the first time with white to cover up the background and then add another color on top. Or I can take a color that is semi-translucent, like this one, for instance, and hope for the best. And if it doesn't work out perfectly, then I can do a second layer with the same color to make it more opaque. And that's what I'm going to do, because the tool is going to help me get it in the same position. So it doesn't matter if I have to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 layers of paint on top of each other. It will always be in the same place. So I can just go ahead and do that with a color that is not completely opaque. So I'm going to roll out this color. And you can see it shows already that this is not opaque, because you can see the leftover color shining through. So this is definitely not going to cover up the entire background in one go, but that's fine. So I'm going to put that in the corner again. And I have to make sure that I rub well so I get into all of the open areas. And then lift it up. And the masks may stay behind on the plate. Oh, that's not too bad, actually. I kind of like that you can still see a little bit of the background shining through. But this worked quite well. So yeah, if I want to have this more opaque, what I can do is take these 2 masks and put them back on here in the same position. The paint is still a bit wet, so I have to be careful. And then this one too. And then I also have these silhouettes here, which is fun. I can decide to use those silhouettes and pull them up with a new layer of paint. So I will just leave this for a moment and dry this one. And even if it's just silhouettes, I mean, you can, it doesn't have to be a finished project. Your prints don't have to be finished projects. You can always go back in there with markers, with pens, with crayons, whatever products you want to use, and create a mixed media piece and add outlines and textures and all kinds of things. But it's fun to already have a base. So I'm just going to use this, roll out the paint. I have a little bit of the wet left over of the turquoise green. I'm just going to use that too. Just see what happens here. I hardly ever clean off my my plate. I like to use paper to create a print to clean up my my plate. So at some point, if there's a lot of leftovers, I will just roll out a layer of paint, put my paper on top and leave it until everything is dry. As I said before, if everything is dry, you can be sure that you pull up all of the paint. And so that's also a way to clean your plate. And then a lot of times you will be surprised with what comes up and how you can use that. So here we go. This is actually quite a fun print to work further on, I think. And then let's do another layer on this one. I'm just going to make sure that this doesn't come off. And then I'm just going to use that same color for another layer.
Birgit, what is the name of your handheld drying tool that you use?
This one.
Yes.
So this is just a balloon pump. So this is used to pump balloons, and yeah, so I just use it. Cold air comes out, so I use it to dry the paint a little bit quicker. You can also use it when you work with, for instance, watercolors or inks, and you can use it to move around the ink or the paint that you're working with, which can also give fun effects. Okay, let's do that second layer. There we go. And as you can see, it is already way more opaque. I could totally work with this. I'm fine with a little bits of orange that you can still see here, but yeah, if you want it to be even more opaque, then you can add even a third layer to that. And then of course we have another set of silhouettes here that I can print. But let's have a look at that print that I made before with the flowers. This should be dry by now. And it is. So what I also like to do, if I use sturdy paper, and especially on the bigger plates. Sometimes when you try to pull off the paper from the plate, it kind of bends or maybe even rips. Then it's better to just turn everything over and roll off the plate from the paper instead of the other way around, because this keeps your paper nice and flat, as you can see. So yeah, this is just a single print, but because of the tool, it's nicely in the middle of my paper and I have this nice and white border all around. So we're already almost an hour in, but I really want to show you that you can also do this with a round plate, because it's so fun. And even if you use for instance I don't know if we still have them, but maybe you have them at home, the little triangles, the sets with the smaller plates, with the little plates in different shapes. So if you have them, then the tool can also be used for those. So if I am going to use the wider tool, the 1-inch tool, as I said, I need my paper to be 2 inch bigger than my plate. And this plate, this circle, is 4 inches. So I have 6 by 6 inch paper here. And as you can see, it is very hard to have the tool in the same angle every time. Because how do you know if you are not a little bit like maybe just a tiny bit off and don't have it completely in the same angle? Well, the good news is it doesn't need to be in the exact same angle, because wherever this tool is, the distance from the corner to the plate will always be the same. So no matter how you have this tool next to your circle, you will always have the circle in the same position. The only thing that might be tricky is if you will, for instance, use text or something and you want to have it like completely straight. What you could do then is make sure that your paper is big enough to and put a line on your paper and line up your tool with the pencil line on your paper to make sure that you always have it straight. But if you just do random textures, then it really doesn't matter if for the first print you have your angle like this and for the second print you have it like this. It will just be on top of each other. And I'm going to prove it. So it looks to me as if this is a new plate actually. And I have not used this specific plate before, which means that it is possible that the paint will beat up a little bit because there is a little bit of mineral oil on the surface of the plate. Usually your plates work best after you've done a couple of prints and cleaned it a couple of times with baby oil. And it becomes a little less slick, and then the paint spreads nicer and stays in the position where you put it nicely. So I'm just going to place my paper. And I'm going to pull it up. And this is my circle. And now I want to do a texture on there. Like I have one here For instance, this is made, a texture that is made from foam board or poster board. And I used an embossing folder to create the texture in the foam board. And there is a tutorial on the Gelli Arts blog about how to make these textures. So if you have a bunch of embossing folders, then all you have to get is some poster board, which is basically 2 layers of paper with some foam in between. It's usually used for presentations. If you have some foam board and you have some embossing folders, then you can create these texture tools for gel printing. But maybe I should use a different pattern, because now I'm making it hard on myself with the numbers, because I don't have that line to line up and make sure they get straight on my print. So I'm just going to use another texture, but again, foam board and embossing folders. There we go. Then I put my tool there, and I'm going on purpose to put it in a different angle to show you that it doesn't matter. And here we go, nicely lined up. And I'm going to do yet another texture down here. What color am I going to use? How about this one? Oh yeah, same problem as before. And this time I'm going to use this texture, which is some kind of packaging material that was in a box that I received. And they will be overlapping a little bit because I used quite some paint. But that's fine. I'm just going to push this in. To create some texture. And here we go, another layer. And everything is nicely within the edge of the first print. So maybe we can just turn the camera around, and so I can say goodbye. So I hope that this helped understanding what you can do with the placement tool, how it can be helpful for you if you want to use, if you want to create nice borders, or if you want to do multiple layer printing and have the layers all in the same position every time. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again in one of the upcoming classes. And I wish you a wonderful day. See you again. Bye.